All right, good morning, everybody. February 8th, I think this is meeting number 12. We've got enough folks to get going. Just as a reminder, I am recording this. A couple programming notes before we get moving. Fred Kelly from the 100% RPS work group is going to be available to give a presentation at 12:30. So let's plan on taking a break for lunch a little bit early today, maybe around 11:45, 11:50. And after that, we have Brett Sproul from the benefits costs analysis work group. Now, those presentations lead me into just a quick comment on some of the written comments that were received about the work group kind of creeping into some other areas that maybe we shouldn't be. The reason we're having all these work groups presentations is because the commission specifically encouraged us to do that. So that's why we're doing it, not necessarily because I want to add more to folks' plates, but the commission said we should do it, so that's why we're doing it. And in terms of the items that were kicked to us by the interconnection work group, and I think it was part of RM 81. I don't think we have an option to punt those until after the report's done. I think the commission's anticipating having something in our report. If we can come to some kind of agreement, great. If we can't, that's fine. But doing it, continuing to meet on those topics after the report's issued, I think defeats the purpose, because we're not going to have another chance to submit that to the commission and get them to have a ruling on it in advance of doing any kind of metrics, which is going to be a good time for everyone. So with that, do we have any, either Eli or Jacob, or do you guys have any updates on your metrics or transparency subgroups?
Morning, Judge.
Morning.
No update from us on the DSP metrics work. We've been continuing to work on that in the background, and it's still on us to follow up with the group of stakeholders with another iteration of that, and then to get feedback, and then to meet once again. So we're still on that track to do so. Okay.
Do you have, and Jacob, I'll probably ask you the same thing. Do you have a ballpark timeline as to when you might have something to present? Just because I know we're in February and April's quickly approaching.
Yeah, I'd say in front of the work group, our goal would probably be to get something by the end of this month.
Excellent. Okay, great. All right, Jacob.
Yeah, for the stakeholder engagement work groups, we have meetings scheduled next Wednesday for the first meeting. Looking to develop kind of the straw ahead of time to be able to provide people to discuss there. I think we're also aiming for the end of the month. It'll likely take a second meeting. Okay. I'm an optimist and hope we can accomplish it in one meeting, but the realist part of me recognizes that probably won't happen. So.
Right. Understood. Now you referenced the straw, and I know you guys made a couple references in your comments to the straw man. Now, are you revising the straw man, the entire straw man, as part of this?
Yeah, so we've been developing that further. A lot of stakeholders asked for a little bit more detail within that, and based on some of the conversations that we've had throughout this working group,
great.
Bring that.
All right, that was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page on that. All right, I appreciate that, fellas. All right, anything before we get moving?
I did actually have one question this morning, Judge. I was hoping to get a little bit of clarity on the timeline for the final report, recognizing it's April 30th. When can parties expect a draft report? When is last time for parties to provide any final comments?
Sure.
Be incorporated.
Sure. That's fair. My goal would be to have it. Okay, so the 30th is on a Tuesday. I can't imagine that we're going to meet beyond the 17th, if at all. So my goal would be to have it, at least the initial draft, to everyone at least 2 weeks out before the 30th. And that way I can compile everybody's changes. And the way I've done it in the past, and I don't know if there's, I'm sure there's a better way to do it. But I pretty much take everyone's changes and color code them and then put them on top of one another, and then try and make it all make sense. So I don't take the joint utilities changes or additions, put them in, and then put them in, and then consider OPCs, and then because I'd be looking at different documents. So so I'd hope to everyone at least 2 weeks beforehand, maybe give everyone a week to give me some changes, and then hopefully I can get it back out to everyone for another crack. Kind of help, Jacob? Is that kind of what you're looking for? Yeah, I mean, if I can get it out sooner, great.
Okay.
Yes, sir, Al.
Yeah, good morning, Judge. Morning, everybody. So this discussion it's actually been on my mind as well in terms of what we are actually going to report when we get to the final report. I mean, we've had a lot of discussion of different perspectives on each of the issues in each of the blocks of the JADE map, and now we're also talking about getting a revised version of the straw man and so on and so on. But I believe that we are trying to come up with concrete recommendations to the commission, because if we don't do that, if we just report on the content of all these discussions, then the next phase, which is regulation development after the rulemaking, which will require that regulation development, we'll go back and have the same discussions all over again. So it seems to me that we really should be trying to come up with as much consensus-based as possible, concrete recommendations, rather than just a report of what we've discussed. But I don't know what exactly you foresee in that regard.
No, I mean, again, if we can get a consensus, that'd be tremendous. But I mean, I don't think that's actually, I don't think it's realistic. But I mean, I'd like to have concrete recommendations on issues where we don't agree. I mean, I know the utilities are batting around the straw man. If somehow they can thread the needle and make everybody happy with it, great. But the clock's ticking on it. I mean, if you have a suggestion, I'm all ears. but we've got a ton of issues.
The only suggestion I would have would be to maybe, as we get to the end of this session, for example, we kind of reiterate what we might put forward as a recommendation coming out of the discussion, or
sure.
Options, whatever.
I can do that. And I would note a lot of the issues that we talked about in blocks 3 and 4 are things that I think the utilities wanted to go back and revisit once we had more of a defined process set. Jacob, does that ring a bell with you? Because I know OPC had several issues where they wanted, they had proposed actions to bridge what they foresaw as gaps, and then the utilities wanted to come back and revisit that.
Yeah, I think the thought there was, and it kind of leads into what you're saying here, Judge, is once we identify the best practices, start then discussing kind of what is the next steps, what are the recommended steps to start to work down a roadmap.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. But yeah. I'm if folks have suggestions, I'm all about it. But yeah, I don't see consensus on everything. I think that's pretty evident. But again, if we can just get decent recommendations for the commission, I'll be happy at least. I don't know if the commission will be happy. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, no, just a thought on that, Judge. I think that makes sense from my perspective. Regardless of consensus, it sounds like what your intent is to kind of delineate what some of the key recommendations that you've heard from stakeholders are, and it sounds like those will kind of be encapsulated both from these meetings and from the comments that have been submitted. So as long as it encapsulates all those recommendations, I think regardless of consensus, and obviously laying out consensus where there is and laying out what parties feel where there's not, as long as the report kind of surfaces what those key recommendations are, then I think that is at least from OPC's view what we think should be in the final report.
Okay.
Right. And could I just, just to agree on, I think what was being said, I think we may not have, we obviously don't on a whole number of points have consensus, but if we can frame those different perspectives as options for recommendation on a particular topic, that's a little different than just reporting on the what was said and who took what position and so on and so forth. But actually, this group recommends that, and the other group recommends this, and let the commission take a look, and they can make their own recommendation. But but just framing it that way rather than just a report of
right. Yeah, and that was my intent. I apologize if that didn't come across, but yeah, that would be my intent.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.
Great.
All right. Let's see. All right. With that, my thought would be just to go down the issues that I had set forth. I guess the follow-up issues before we get to block 7 and 8 on DER forecasting and things like that, and folks can weigh in. All right. So hosting capacity, it seems that, or determining hosting capacity, it seems that there's an agreement, probably more or less from RM81, that it should be done on a circuit by circuit basis. And it's my understanding that at least the joint utilities are in the process of formulating your methodologies. Is that correct? Okay. Is that a process that's going to be ready to show to the work group, or because I know that you referenced a collaborative approach in some of your comments?
Yeah, so I guess kind of separating a couple of things. One,
Sure.
In terms of the collaborative effort, I think what came over from interconnection was determining a common methodology for the state for determining hosting capacity. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think there's the collaboration required between the utilities, and any methodology developed there having some level of flexibility within it because of different system design, IT systems, and the variety of things. And that's where those comments were. As far as the circuit specific piece, which is what was decided in RM81, that is something we are working on. And I, in terms of within this working group, obviously developing and implementing that takes significant investments in IT systems and GIS systems. And so from a timeline perspective, I don't know if that necessarily fits within. Okay,
that's fine. I did not know you guys were working on it. So just in terms of, if you could just educate me on RM81. So wasn't there an agreement on how hosting capacity should be determined?
I think from RM81, at least my understanding was there was the space for circuits, determining circuit specific hosting capacity.
Okay. But in terms of the methodology, that's right, still okay, to be determined. Okay. Yeah. All right. Al, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. Just noting that both the Joint Excellent Utilities and also OPC and Strategian had expressed interest in the New York State work, which there's additional detail in the slide decks that are attached to the summary that I found and passed along. And so I was able to actually get the most detailed slide deck to get to download. So just 2 minutes before this session started today, I sent that around to people, that slide deck. So that's available. The other one, you have to just go to that summary page and use the link for the 2022 one. But the 2020 is the one that gives the most technical detail. So I did attach that. So that's there if people are interested.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you sharing that. All right, Eli, go ahead, sir.
Just to speak on that, thanks for teeing that up, Al. I agree that the approach that New York took seems to be a particularly useful approach, and what we also found to be really beneficial is that it's probably in the deck that Al attached and sent to the work group, they kind of walk through a future forward-looking roadmap of hosting capacity improvements. That is the exact type of thing that I think at least OPC would be interested in seeing kind of come out of this work group. Not asking for us to use one of the work group meetings for like the utilities to walk through a hosting capacity upgrade roadmap, but really the idea that, maybe coming out of this work group, one of the core recommendations is, the utilities should develop a roadmap that looks at how they can improve hosting capacity over the next, or hosting capacity methodologies over the next 5 to 10 years, pointing to the New York example. And so that is something that we have been considering as, as a potential recommendation coming out of this work group, is just that utilities could develop these roadmaps such that they can kind of be tracked and followed, so stakeholders in the commission have an understanding of what the timeline looks like to actually make these improvements to the hosting capacity and hosting capacity calculation and analysis process.
Okay, and Eli, would you envision that being part of kind of the mid to long-term plans that the utilities are doing now?
Yeah, I guess I would say it's definitely related. Or when you say the mid to long-term plans, you're just referring to their standing current ongoing planning process. Is that right?
Right, and I guess in what they've proposed to do moving forward.
Yeah, that's right. This would absolutely be a component of that, Judge. And I think it might be beneficial for it to live separately. It should be its own thing. Like improving hosting capacity, as folks have noted, is not a small undertaking. And so we absolutely understand, as Jacob noted, there will be IT investments needed to accommodate that. And therefore, that's kind of why it would be beneficial to see what a roadmap might look like of when utilities actually envision deploying these IT investments to enable these, additional system capabilities, if you will.
Okay. All right, thank you. Jacob, I know you may be hearing this for the first time. Is that something that sounds palatable to, at least to Jacob Berlin?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have heard kind of this theme before in terms of reporting on terms of, and I think this even gets back to a little bit of the, what are the actions to bridge the gap kind of conversation, is really just what are the opportunities of what does that roadmap look like? Certainly don't want to necessarily commit to anything at this moment.
No, I got it.
I think that's an area that we would, understandable and reasonable in terms of some type of reporting around kind of what that may look like and what that timeline is and everything.
Okay. All right. That's fair enough. I'm sure we'll be touching on that again. I'm sure Eli will throw something in writing next time around. So it sounds like, where we are in determining hosting capacity, it kind of to be determined. I don't know. I know Al and OPC are fans of this New York approach, but is there any specific? Yes, Tim.
So and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, from the utilities, but I thought that I read in the utility comments that they've already thought about, the circuit specific hosting capacity, analysis. And there was something about like having it done before the implementation of MCAM or something like that in like 18 months. Or I thought that was something that I read, but I could be wrong.
Go ahead, Mark, jump in, please.
Yeah. Good morning, Judge. Good morning, everybody. I think you got that from ours, Tim. So prior to the RM81 hearing, PE proactively had offered to, basically communicated our plan to have hosting capacity maps by May 1st. We're on track for that, knowing that the hosting capacity on those maps is going to not be circuit specific. It's going to be based off of the rules that we use, but understanding also that that's where it was going. So we committed by the start of MCAM. The reason for that is that we need that to implement MCAM in a locational based way as is preferred. So that's why we timed it that way. And it also makes sense for us to be able to do that with our internal resources to limit cost. So that's where we're at there. I just also want to make a point as I'm talking, when we're talking about hosting capacity, I assume we're talking about what would be included in like a hosting capacity map that's available for everybody to see. When we get an application, we've always reviewed that individually, and would deny it if it creates an actual violation. So I mean, there's determining hosting capacity, which is more of a proactive thing, and then there's determining whether an interconnection can go through without improvements. Those are two different processes, and the latter is much more detailed. It involves power flow analysis and other things. So just want to make sure that we were talking about what goes on the maps, not necessarily what would restrict an interconnection, at least as First Energy Potomac Edison views it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you,
and
sir.
I would agree. I would agree with that. Yes, for the specifics of this conversation.
Okay, so see if we can put a bow on at least this topic. Okay, so determining hosting capacity. Are we just going to, I mean, I don't even know. I'm trying to formulate what the recommendation would be. I know the utilities are still working on it. Some folks like this New York approach.
What I might recommend, and this is kind of building off of a couple of folks' comments, as Tim and Mark just pointed out, PE's comments state that PE is moving to a method of evaluating circuits on a circuit by circuit basis, hosting capacity on a circuit by circuit basis within the next 12 to 18 months.
Right.
If that was something that I would say other utilities could also commit to, that would be, a reasonable improvement.
Okay.
And then I think kind of moving beyond that as the next steps is, what does a hosting capacity process improvement roadmap look like in the medium to long term?
Okay.
Right. So it's kind of like short term is move
Sure.
towards this circuit by circuit approach, and
Right.
then medium to long term is make other changes to the hosting capacity methodology and maps and overall approach that make essentially just make hosting capacity increasingly more useful for the purpose of citing DER.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
So, Jacob.
Yeah, in terms of a timeline, it's something I think we would have to take back. I kind of mentioned before, as we're starting to explore making those changes for circuit specific, there's a lot of investments required, right? IT changes, GIS system changes, process changes. That's a lot of resources, and that's a time period. So we would certainly have to take back to understand the feasibility of that, and obviously what those impacts may be.
Sure. Yeah, and I would note that that's, I guess, a rough estimate, but so it sounds like everyone's at least in agreement that it should be circuit by circuit. I guess the time to implement that could be a year or more. And utilities are still trying to figure out exactly how it should be determined, how you're going to calculate the hosting capacity. Is that correct?
In terms of developing the methodology?
Right.
Yeah, I think so. Someone from the planning team can correct me if I'm wrong there, but
okay. I just want to make sure I'm just trying to capture everything. Paul Virginsky asks, how often would these interval maps be updated? I know that's we kind of talked about that. I know OPC's, oh, go ahead, Mr. Bartlett.
Oh, I was just going to add that, again, if you look at the stepwise process from New York, the end point was monthly updates, but we understand from the discussions that have been held that that's not going to be immediately possible.
Right.
So I think that's where what Eli's talking about and what New York has done, and I think is a rational process, is to have this progressive development of I think we have to remember that we're going through a transformation of the grid that actually is going to take place over time. And so, we do what we can now to accommodate needs now, and but also we'll progressively sophisticate that. So I think that having that stepwise process defined so that maybe monthly is an endpoint, but probably, I guess from what I'd heard before, not achievable immediately. So
right.
Okay to say
not achievable and not agreed upon either. I know. I know.
I was going to say we've talked a lot about that, but I believe
right. Yeah. I just
utilities position was quarterly.
After I read the question, it all started coming back to me. Tim.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that point that it's a process. and I think specifically to like a lot of what OPC is brought up is that these are things that we see as being needed in the future. And yeah, we don't see them as being needed tomorrow, but we do see them needed in the future. But we do expect that the hosting capacity process becomes more operationalized. And so it's, you know, at some point, this conversation is no longer just about creating maps for developers to look at beforehand. And it's really about informing flexible interconnection and planning processes that are going to be forward-looking for DER utilization and optimization. And so that's kind of what we're, you know, that's kind of our emphasis, is that, you know, in creating these plans for where hosting capacity is going, you know, they really need to be looking at what hosting capacity is going to be used for in the future. And while we're like very supportive of like the New York example is a really useful example, we also have to recognize that that was put together like in 2019, 2018 timeframe. Like that's literally like 6 years ago now, and that's an eternity in DER time. And so there's actually there's new use cases, there's new things that have been contemplated since then. And so what this progressing, like what this plan and what this like roadmap for hosting capacity looks like actually might look quite a bit different from what New York's looks like, just in terms of end state and like use cases. So that's something that I would raise just as like a nuance to that conversation and things to like be vigilant of.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tim. All right. Anybody else? I think I can try and come up with something. It might not be too bad, but I appreciate the input, Eli. That will definitely help me.
Thanks, Judge.
All right. Anybody else on how we're determining hosting capacity? All right. And I would imagine that moving on, determining reserve hosting capacity is somewhat of a similar discussion. I know OPC wants it based on DER forecasts and for there to be consideration of DER adoption rates. Utilities are still developing their methods. And Al had recommended circuit-specific process with a timeline implementation with a priority for circuits that have already been identified as constraints to development.
Yeah, just to be clear, I raised that as just one possibility of since it can't all be done at once. If there are circuits that already have been identified as constrained, where the possibility of reassessing capacity might be possible, that would be one way of sequencing. That was my thought.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Eli, did you want to?
Yeah. Thanks. From my read of comments, it felt like utilities were generally supportive. I think both in the joint Exelon and in the PE comments. Maybe need to double check that with the PE comments, but I know joint Exelon utilities at least said they support the use of DER forecasting in determining reserve hosting capacity, right sizing, and then also areas for hosting capacity upgrade plans, and that they're in the process of developing these methodologies. I was wondering if Jacob or someone else from the utility group is maybe able to, we don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but maybe just highlight where you're at in the process of developing these methodologies. Is the intent that there would be perhaps like a revised methodology in the very near term? And is that something that would be reasonable to present to this work group? Or is that slightly a longer term lens process to refine those DER forecasting methodologies?
Sure. I don't have the specific answer, so I will take my understanding, and hopefully if anyone on the team, if I'm wrong, they'll chime in and correct me here. But I think right now we're very much at the early stages of developing those and view that more as kind of a long-term process that's going to take place to develop those methodologies.
And is it fair to say that, I mean, how you determine the reserve and how you determine, or how you calculate hosted capacity, generally they're very similar? Or are they two different methodologies?
I think we're
For-
referring to the same thing,
Oh.
right? I guess, well, maybe that's been a point that I've always, because yeah, the RM81, the final report in the interconnection work group, I feel like kind of interchangeably used hosting capacity and reserve hosting capacity, but I think it was intended to refer to the same thing. Someone can definitely correct me if that's wrong now.
Mark, go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. I can try my best. Others can correct me. So as I understand, I mean, we would do some kind of analysis to determine hosting capacity on a circuit. So let's say it's 3 megawatts. You know, you subtract what is on the circuit. Let's say it's 1. So your remaining hosting capacity is 2. At some point, it gets to a level low enough that you couldn't even have, like if you have 0 hosting capacity, you can't install a rooftop system. So like we don't find that reasonable. If you're putting 10 kW on your roof, you should in theory kind of always be able to do that. So we're going to say we won't let that circuit go below 150 kW to make sure that those can connect. The way that we would intend, we really haven't gotten to this point yet, is to say, well, let's reserve enough so that we have, let's say, 5 years. That's kind of the number we threw out, you know, of those small interconnections. And so that would give us enough time to say, well, maybe we need to consider gaining approval for a hosting capacity upgrade plan so that we don't run out completely. But in the meantime, we're not having those small interconnections get, you know, have to do a large upgrade or not be able to interconnect. Anybody can correct me if I'm thinking of it wrong.
No, I think that's right, Mark. You're right. I think the difference is the reserve piece is holding space for those very small, like rooftop solar interconnections that, you know, Joe and Jane Doe can just go put on their roofs.
Right. And there's going to be two different methodologies associated with those.
Okay.
Right, but they might use the same forecast because we need to determine like how much do we think is going to happen in the next 5 years. Right now, we would basically use history and say what has been connected over the last 5 years, but we realize that that is only one part of the calculation.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I'll say I think I fully agree with you, Mark. That's how I see this as being laid out, and that's kind of how I see the general process by which you would kind of assign some sort of reserve capacity for a circuit. The only thing that I would like point out and potentially add to that is just having visibility on potential flexible interconnection solutions that can allow these smaller DER to connect without creating as many issues. Potentially, I know we're not necessarily there yet, but like things like volt watt and things like potential like scheduled interconnections farther into the future that could potentially allow these small interconnections to interconnect while avoiding exports during periods that it would cause issues. But yeah, that would be the only thing that I would add to that, is just that could change the calculus on how much is really needed to reserve in order to connect 24 systems over the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. And really I don't want to say the only issue, but the big issue is how much should be reserved, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
And so your initial calculation might say we expect 24 systems over 5 years on this circuit, or maybe that's a bad it might be 200, but either way, it might be we expect this many circuits or this many systems, and your first the way that we have been doing this, it would be that you just take, okay, well, the average system size is 10 kW. So if it's 200 systems times 10 kW, that's 2 megawatts, versus thinking about potential opportunities for flexible interconnection and say, well, you might be able to avoid some of those exports with some sort of flexibility, and that might bring it down to 1.5 megawatts or something like that.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks, Tim. Paul.
Yes, good morning. Since we're talking about hosting capacity and circuits, the utilities, at least in my estimation, have a lot of data from all these AMIs that were put in 5-10 years ago. I know PE does not have that. That is very granular data that could be used. And and it seems, as I put in my comments, that it's only been used for billing. Yet every customer on a circuit, the utilities know what their usage is, what their max load is over the year. And to me, that seems to be a very easy way of determining what hosting capacity might be on a circuit. And there's algorithms that will provide that deep learning for what is needed. And that's not a heavy lift, at least in my estimation. So I'd be interested in finding out from the utilities as to what exactly are they doing with this huge amount of data that is absolutely necessary for AI deep learning, and I think could massively help us with the hosting capacity issue.
Well, I'll start, and I think this was in either our comments or some of our reply comments, because I think this was kind of a discussion initiated last week around AMI data. So joint utilities do use AMI data for more than just billing, specifically around hosting capacity. PHI already uses that data as part of its power flow process for determining hosting capacity. And BGE also intends to integrate that into that process as well. So it's data we use in various ways already beyond billing and within the hosting capacity specific discussion. Parts of the Exelon utilities with PHI already use it, and BG is looking to move in that way as well. Again, obviously there's system investments and different things like that that are part of that. So we very much look towards that AMI data and use it where appropriate and where we can incorporate it.
So what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, that's going to be a component of your methodology going forward. And I'm particularly interested in that because, well, you can put and ascribe to a person or a customer their maximum load, but no one uses maximum load. That's kind of a given. So that the available hosting capacity would be less than what is in a customer service panel, and you have that granular data. So I think that's a good thing. I appreciate that. Thanks, Jacob.
Of course.
All right. Jacob, let me come back to you. So Mark kind of explained in their written comments how they're I guess in the short term, how they're going to be determining hosting capacity or reserve capacity, excuse me. So do the joint utilities have a short-term plan, how they're going to determine the reserve capacity?
I believe we have a process in place for currently determining the hosting capacity.
Sure. Okay. But I guess you don't envision changes to that until you formulate your methodologies.
I don't have anything specific as of right now in terms of if there's anything additional short term.
Okay.
But as of right now, I think looking towards, continuing to develop those additional circuit specific methodologies for reserve hosting capacity.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. Yeah, so I just wanted to see if I have this straight. I think Eli said that the RM81 talked about both capacity, hosting capacity, and reserve capacity. They're not exactly interchangeable. In fact, they're inextricably linked. But I thought that PE gave a reasonable summary of the hosting capacity of an individual circuit, which is different from the settings that are in the TIRs right now. The hosting capacity of an individual circuit is determined by the capacity of the circuit and how the protective devices are set and all those other things that actually determine. So one circuit might be 8, one might be 10, one might be 11, whatever. Then the reserve capacity on that circuit is individually determined based on the projection of how much space is going to be needed for small DERs to be accommodated on that circuit. So you put that aside, you subtract it from whatever the individual capacity of that circuit is, and for the individual projection of need for reserve capacity on that same circuit, you take that out, and the remainder is what there is of hosting capacity available for larger projects. And that, as you add more DERs onto that circuit, you take that much out and you've got some left. But the reserve capacity still sits there to be filled up with individual projects. And so as somebody, I don't remember whether one of the utility, I think it was either Exelon or PE, mentioned that in a rural area, you might project, where it's sparsely populated, you might project fewer individual projects on whatever the total capacity of the circuit is. You would project fewer individual projects, but it's more likely that they would be interested in building larger projects in that rural area. So that kind of individual thinking about the reserve capacity applies to the individual calculation of the total capacity. I think that's what I'm hearing, but I just wanted to bounce that off people. They're intimately related, but they're two separate calculations, bottom line.
I think everything you said is correct, Al. I don't know if I fully followed or maybe just misheard the last sentence, but yeah, the reserve hosting capacity calculation flows from the hosting capacity calculation, if that makes sense.
Well, it's a calculation that is subtracted from the total the total capacity of the circuit. So then you calculate the reserve capacity, and the remainder left is hosting capacity for larger projects, right? That's what it comes down to.
Okay. All right. Hey, Jacob, any reaction to Al's suggestion of kind of targeting or prioritizing circuits that have already been identified as constraints to development in terms of, I guess, revisiting the host reserve capacity and how it's calculated there?
I think that's something we can certainly think about. Obviously, since we're focusing on reserve hosting capacity, the methodology for determining it on a circuit specific level would, be required first.
Okay.
Before we can then prioritize, what evaluations.
Okay. All right. So in a nutshell, it's not necessarily a bad idea, but you can't really do anything until you figure out how you're going to calculate it. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. All right.
Can I just ask another question? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Yeah. The determination of reserve capacity has gotten tied together with DER forecasting. Now, we know that most of the utilities don't have DER forecasting in place. And so if we are talking about timelines, it seems to me that if we have to have DER forecasting in place to calculate reserve hosting capacity, then we're talking about a longer timeline. Which may circle then back to this idea of prioritizing certain circuits. There has to be some kind of sequencing. But in any case, I just wanted to see if that's true, that if we're saying what I think we're saying, we're actually linking hosting capacity to, or reserve capacity determination to DER forecasting, and we don't have DER forecasting.
I think at least that's how I understood PE to do it. I think they're kind of doing I don't want to say a back of the envelope, but a simpler reserve hosting capacity calculation for the next few years while they're developing their DER forecasting. Is that kind of right, Mark?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that you could do it right now just based off of historical. I mean, we have historical dates of interconnections and the capacities that are associated. So understanding that that's just backward looking, you could say, well, if at the same pace, then we would install 200 kW of small interconnections on this feeder over the next 5 years, and that could be a base. You could do some simple things there by then saying, is it urban/rural, and we expect to see more in urban, for example. Or you could do it by county. We expect that based on on county initiatives, you're going to see Montgomery and Frederick County outpace Washington and Allegheny County. I mean, you can make some high level, changes like that, without having a full, like, I guess, DER forecast that's locational.
All right.
Yeah, I think it works. That's very helpful. And I would actually like to see that kind of idea captured in a recommendation.
Okay. All right.
And yeah, I'll just add, I think this all underscores kind of the need to understand what the roadmap to improve hosting capacity calculations and how DER forecasting will be incorporated into that. That's part of why a roadmap will be really helpful to understand what is, like, when folks are saying in the medium term, we will do this, or in the long term, we will do this. It would help a lot to get clearer parameters around what that actually means and what timing wise, when the utilities think that will actually be able to be deployed.
Right. And just so I'm clear, Jacob, you guys are just kind of maintaining what you're doing now until you've got everything squared away in terms of determining hosting capacity.
I think, at least as far as I understand it, we're working towards determining reserve hosting capacity, methodology for a circuit specific level. I don't know right now, and I would defer to my technical team if they want to chime in, or we can take it back, whether that does or doesn't require DER forecasting. But we can follow up on that.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to make sure I capture what you guys are doing now and what you envision short term. All right. All right. Anybody else on reserve capacity? Seems like there's kind of a general agreement. Folks like the way PE is proposing to do it. So, all right. All right. Right sizing interconnection upgrades. Let's see. OPC is a big fan of the H cups. I just think it's easier to call them that. Let's see. You guys want the forecasting methods, which we know we're not going to get, where the upgrades are going to occur, how they're going to be prioritized, and of course, the reporting requirement. All right. PE's got a similar process looking at the next 5 years. So, I mean, there's not a ton here. Let me see where. Jacob, I mean, do you guys have anything on the? Well, you talked about the solar ready energy system that you guys presented, and I think you presented as part of what PC, one of the other work groups, or did you guys present that to the commission?
It was initially presented to the interconnection working group,
Okay.
I believe, during phase 5.
Okay. God, phase 5, that's unbelievable. And so that hasn't been presented by the commission, or what was there a recommendation by the interconnection work group on that proposal?
I don't think so specifically. I think ultimately the work that working group during that phase shifted towards the MCAM process and worked towards implementing that. And that was the result of that phase 5. So I don't think that's been presented as a process in front of the commission, at least.
All right. So that's all right. So, all right. So you're not necessarily opposed. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Whoever.
No, I was just gonna say I can jump in with some thoughts into kind of.
I would love that.
Okay. So I guess first note, I think just to clarify, we support the H cups with
We can call them upgrade plans. It's just how I had it on my notes.
It's a weird. It feels like a weird thing to say.
Well, it could be.
We support the hosting capacity upgrade plans as long as they have the right parameters kind of established around them, and that was one of the key points that we've been making, is that understanding what it looks like to right size and what the actual process for right sizing entails. I will say, PE's comments on right sizing, I think, are very helpful. And they provide what a high level overview of what a right sizing process looks like, what the triggers are, etc. So we really appreciate those comments from Mark and the PE folks. That sounds like a great initial step in determining what a right sizing approach looks like. And so we would also encourage the other utilities to, you know, I guess we'd be curious if other utilities align with the approach that PE laid out. It's a pretty simplified high level approach. But I think that's a great initial step. And then kind of the second piece I wanted to bring on top of this is that, you know, the directive here is how DER forecasting is used in right sizing. And so we kind of delineated a few key points that we think hosting capacity upgrades, and therefore the right sizing component of that, will need to be based on DER forecasts that consider a number of kind of best practices related to forecasting DERs, parcel level analysis, not just looking at existing interconnections, but forecasted future interconnections, flexible interconnection, et cetera. So I think it comes down to, there's two kind of key elements about right sizing, which is one, developing the right sizing process, and then two, refining the DER forecasting process that underpins the right sizing decision making, if that makes sense. And then the third point I'll bring up, and this kind of, this bleeds a little bit into, I think, like the next hosting capacity component, the fourth one. But you brought up the proposal that the utilities presented last meeting, so I just wanted to follow up on that. That process generally makes sense. With the utility, just as a reminder, the utilities walked through the process, which would be an RFI, a request for information from folks from the developer community about what projects they're seeking to deploy. And based on that information, utilities would say, all right, you know, we foresee DER projects going here, here, and here. This is where we should proactively invest in hosting capacity or do right sizing, et cetera. And I think that generally works. But one thing that we discussed in our comments is that it will be important for that RFI process to be structured in a way that focuses not just on immediate term interconnections, that focuses instead on longer term lens interconnections. And so it'll be important to understand to what extent developers can and are able and are willing to provide that information within the RFI process. And again, I'm not a developer by any stretch, and so I don't have a sense of what this looks like from a developer's perspective. But if they were, you know, the whole idea behind these hosting capacity upgrade plans is that we're investing in the system today so that there can be future interconnections down the road. And so it's not really about, you know, what developers are forecasting implementing maybe in the next like 1 or 2 years. It's really about what they're forecasting implementing post hosting capacity upgrade. And we can reasonably assume that a lot, especially these bigger hosting capacity upgrades, are probably going to take a couple years. Like transformer substation level takes even longer. And so we just wanted to, we put this in our comments, but just wanted to underscore the importance of, if it's an RFI that's being used to determine where the hosting capacity upgrade plans will be sited, it should be a long lens RFI, and we should just ensure that developers are truly able to provide that information. And I'm not saying that they can't, but I also don't know for a fact that they can.
Right. Yeah, I did see that. And I think that was one of the questions I had. So I appreciate you hitting that. Okay. So you listed 3 things. The first one was developing the process of right sizing, and the second was developing the forecast, DER forecast. Should those be flipped? Do you need the forecast to develop the right sizing process, or?
I mean, forecast should absolutely inform the right sizing process. Right. So I think it's fair to think of them as flipped. However, I don't know if it's a fair characterization that the utilities don't do DER forecasting. I don't think that's accurate, right? I think what we learned from phase 1 is that DER forecasting is not incorporated into the distribution system planning process. I guess I would assume, and utility folks can correct me if I'm wrong, there's some amount of DER forecasting that is done at all utilities. I guess that's my assumption. I don't recall right off the top how that was discussed in the last phase. So if I'm right and DER forecasting exists today, then you can theoretically develop a right sizing process based on today's approach to DER forecasting. But I think what we're saying is evolve the approach to DER forecasting, and as it evolves, it can just do a better job of informing where these right sizing upgrades should go.
Okay.
And then I guess lastly, I'll add right sizing is a part of MCAM. And if MCAM is not going to be implemented for like 12 to 18 months, there is a good amount of time for the utilities to develop and refine these DER forecasting methodologies within that 12 to 18 month period, such that, you know, by the time that MCAM is actually launched and then utilities are determining where these right sizing upgrades go, it could potentially be based on a new refined DER forecasting methodology, if that makes sense.
It does. It does, at least to me. All right. All right. Jacob,
Yeah, that's
let's unpack.
yeah. I think, you know, Eli, I think you did a good job recapping kind of the solar ready energy system and what that's looking to. And I think we very much agree, you know, looking for developers to provide, you know, as long term of information as they can provide, right? You know, to your point, these are supposed to be system upgrades that are supporting future development. So the more future the developers can provide, the better. And we're very much interested in getting that kind of information.
Do you have
from
any,
developers.
do you have any experience with that? I mean, do you have any knowledge of, you know, how far out developers are willing or can give you
I don't have any
I was
specific-
just curious.
Yeah, I don't have any
All right.
specific.
All right. I'm sorry. I broke your chain of thought.
No, no worries. And so very much agree there. And I think as we outlined in our comments, you know, we see that really as kind of a first step and think, you know, DER forecasting in support of that, you know, can begin to help further define hosting capacity upgrade plans in the future. You know, again, as we've talked about, varying steps along a roadmap. So see that as certainly different parts towards that. I think with the DER forecasting for right sizing as well, very much agree. You know, the utilities have to develop the methodologies that they would use for that type of right sizing, and that the forecasting would certainly feed into that. And as those forecasting methodologies evolve and become more refined, that process will be, you know, in a better place. And I think that's kind of what we highlighted as well in our comments is working on developing those methodologies for what that would look like.
Okay. Now this is a stupid question. Now, are the right sizing methodologies different than reserve capacity and hosting capacity?
I would,
Oh, Eli's nodding. So there's just a lot of methodologies under development here. That's all.
yeah, I would say yes. I mean, my take on that is obviously, you know, determining right sizing is going to be, you know, how are we taking our DER forecast to say, what should the system upgrade look like versus what should it look like based just on the interconnection request at that moment. And so that the methodology describing there is really around how will the process look to determine that right sizing upgrade based on that forecasting. So that would be a different methodology than the methodology used to determine reserved hosting capacity, which is the methodology, which is different from the methodology used to determine hosting capacity on the feeder. So we have a lot of things that we're intermingling right now in the
Okay.
conversation.
No, all right. I'm just trying to make sure I was keeping them straight for my own
Yeah.
perspective.
I would say that my perspective on this is that they're a very similar methodology, but they might have different thresholds.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, isn't like you're looking at your forecast, trying to predict how much is going to come down the pipeline, and you know the right sizing one might have, you know, 5 years out versus your reserve capacity for small DER might look only 3 years out, and then your, you know, so it's kind of like it, you know, it's more or less the same like basic process of looking at what's coming, you know, forecasting, but then having a different threshold on what actually triggers that like reserve capacity or the right size or the proactive upgrade capacity.
I think in terms of how the DER forecast gets incorporated, I agree. That time window would certainly be a factor that will potentially vary. Obviously, we're still working on developing them, but to your point, that is certainly something that can vary, is one of the variables that can be adjusted as we look at how is the forecasting adopted into reserve versus right sizing.
All right, Go ahead, Mark.
Just also, yeah, thanks. Just want to add that the other thing with right sizing is that it's due to an actual request. So the timeline for us to consider the right sizing is going to be considerably shorter than for an H cup, as some like to call it.
Okay.
Because
we should stop doing that. I didn't even realize it until I said it. It looked better on paper until you actually say it. So I apologize for that. So.
No, it's good. So I mean, and we don't want to delay an interconnection. I needed to do a long RFI process to get all this information. So you're generally going to have to do it with whatever information you have at that time, whatever forecast is available. Where if you're doing an upgrade plan, then you do have more time to do that. So I think that they're similar, but the processes do need to be different. And that's one of the big reasons.
Okay. And what do you guys Jacob, are you in favor or in Mark, in favor of developing a separate process for right sizing? As Eli, I think Eli had suggested that. That was one of his first points.
And that's right. And I do want to just clarify my comment. PE put like a paragraph on what the right sizing process looks like. And I think that's just helpful guidance in and of itself, right? Understanding if the utilities, if all the utilities would agree with that process, just to reiterate what it effectively says. If a hosting capacity, so yeah, as Mark noted, right sizing would only occur if right sizing occurs under MCAM, right? It's right sizing is specific to the MCAM piece. So if an MCAM upgrade is being completed, I'm just reading the comments. PE would evaluate whether the DER forecast shows that reserve hosting capacity would be triggered immediately by this upgrade or in the next 5 years. And so that's kind of like piece number one of the methodology, if you will. If it would, right sizing would be considered. Outside of that, PE already would consider right sizing if the upgrade would basically provide a minimal cost increase, but create significant benefits. And so I think that's kind of the gist of what we're looking for, not even something hugely granular, but just at a high level, what are the circumstances? What are the triggers? What are the thresholds under which a utility is going to say, all right, we foresee DER, growth in this area, and therefore we believe we should right size this upgrade. We're not just going to interconnect the upcoming DER that's seeking to interconnect. We want to make this upgrade bigger and be able to accommodate future interconnections. So it's less of, when we say methodology in this instance, we're not talking about a mathematical calculation, right? Like when we're talking hosting capacity methodology, that's a mathematical calculation. This is just a process methodology, if that makes sense. And so if the PE approach, which again is pretty high level, but if that seems reasonable to others, I think that's like a good first step forward in understanding what the right sizing process would look like for each utility.
Thanks for clarifying that, Eli. Jacob?
Yeah, I'll say, to be honest, I didn't receive the PE comments for some reason. I don't know if it's one of the million rules I have in Outlook that sends it to some folder. But so first hearing kind of the PE comments, but we can take that back, and it's helpful to understand from stakeholders of what level of detail within that kind of methodology they're interested in seeing within this, and we can take that back and discuss whether we just agree or align with PEs, or if we have any slight variances in terms of how we see DER forecasting feeding into some type of right sizing methodology. So we can take that back and bring that forward for the next meeting.
I just shot those comments to you.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Anybody else on reserve capacity? Or I'm sorry, not reserve capacity. What were we talking about? And right sizing. And this in Eli, the next topic was capacity upgrade plans or determining the areas. Is that kind of interrelated to the right sizing conversation we just had?
Yeah, these two things are definitely interrelated. Okay. Yeah, the difference to me is that the way right sizing was defined in the phase 5 interconnection proposal is that right sizing is something that flows on from an MCAM upgrade. So if and this was a distinction that was clarified, I think, in the last report. It is right sizing is inherently reactive specifically in that it is only triggered when someone comes in and seeks to interconnect explicitly, right? Like a DER comes in and then like due to MCAM, the costs of interconnecting that or upgrading the hosting capacity are spread system wide. That then triggers a right sizing upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Hosting capacity upgrade plans are a totally distinct, it's a similar idea, but it's a distinct concept, and it's a proactive upgrade where the utilities say, all right, looking at the system, we're going to need more hosting capacity here, here, and here, and we are going to proactively deploy an upgrade. It's not triggered by a DER coming in and saying, hey, I want to interconnect. It's triggered by utility identifying the areas for upgrade. Those are the inherent differences between the two pieces.
Right. Yeah. And there it didn't seem like there were a lot of comments on this particular topic. I'm not sure if it was because you floored everyone with your words. I mean, the utilities kind of addressed it just in passing, I'd say. That essentially they support the use of DER forecasting in determining the specific areas that should be targeted for upgrade plans.
I think our main point is that, you know, as we've said, really the key point with kind of all of these pieces is that we need to get better at forecasting DERs.
Sure.
And DER forecasting should inform all of these processes.
Okay.
Those are the two key components.
That seems like the recurring theme. Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm guessing you assume you agree with that, Jacob?
Yeah, and I think we had put in our reply comments as well. We saw what we had outlined for the solar ready energy system as kind of a first step, moving towards a more proactive attempt at hosting capacity upgrades versus somewhat of a reactive response, and agree that can continue to evolve to be based on DER forecasting, once those forecasting methodologies are in place fully and developed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think overall, Eli, we're in general alignment there.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to agree as well. I think what you're saying, Eli, is that we need a better forecasting system for DER so that we can do this just like we do it already for load. We have load forecasting. We do load capacity upgrade plans all the time, and those are vetted only internally. But we do the same process, and the same thing with right sizing. If we do a load project for a new customer, and our engineers realize that there's now 100 kW of capacity on this main line, they're going to consider doing a larger wire size or a larger transformer. I mean, those are things we've commonly done for forever. We're just using a DER forecast and with new goals to increase adoption of DER into those same processes close as possible.
That's 100%, Mark. That's exactly right. Utilities have been doing processes related to load forecasting and implementing upgrades based on that for years, and in many utility cases over a century, right? Maybe it's been a different process, but they've been doing it for a long time. DER forecasting in the grand scheme of things is relatively new. When things are new, they can be improved upon. It's just about revisiting and refining assumptions, inputs, and methodologies that are being used. And we just think that there's a benefit of bringing like stakeholders into that process, because stakeholders have experience across different states that, some states have been doing DER, or some utilities have been doing DER forecasting longer than others, have more expertise in doing so. And it's just the idea of improving the accuracy of those forecasts as much as possible so that all these processes can be as effective as they possibly can be.
All right. So it sounds like we're kind of on the same page on that. Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Bartlett. I saw your Mr. Hand.
Sorry. Yeah. And I want to appreciate Mark's statement about, the utilities have been doing the load forecasting for a long time, and we just have to make DER forecasting routine part of it. The one point I would want to make, though, is that we are in this dynamic situation where even load forecasting, what we've done in the past, is not going to be sufficient for what we need to do in the future. We've been through decades of relatively stable load, and now as we move towards electrification of so many things, Load forecasting is going to change as well. And certainly DER forecasting is also going to be a dynamic process. One would expect actually that uptake of, changes in load and changes in DER, additions to the grid are likely to become exponential at some point. And so, the techniques that have applied in the past will need to be modified for the future in both cases, both for DERs and for load. So we actually don't know as much as we think we know about how to do both of those things, because we were told in phase one that, load forecasting basically is, looking at what's on the system and any potential large new loads like a shopping center or something like that. But I think things are going to evolve as electrification evolves.
All right. I think everyone would agree with that. So, all right. Let's see. Next topic. All right. Let's see. Touched on that. Dr. Bartlett had raised some, excuse me, potential for new roles for all customer stakeholders and the commission. I didn't see a lot of comments on that particular topic.
And just to clarify, it's the same point again.
Right.
The fact that, we are going into a new era essentially. And so I think the discussion we had about the input from developers around DERs and so on is one aspect of that we're going to need input, increasingly input from, for example, aggregators. They're not playing a big role in the system now. They will be at some point. And so we just need to be, this is, I think, uncommon on two of those following areas of common, I guess, whatever the 6 and 7, whatever they were, right now, individual customers, and I appreciate what the utilities, Jacob's final comments, the second set of comments were that they're already making arrangements to encourage customers to, for example, take the heat pumps or something like that. But right now, those decisions are being made on an individual basis. But at some point, the system is going to have to adapt to the fact that there are going to be a lot of those coming online. And similarly, we'll have to adapt to the application of FERC 2222 and so on. So there will be both individual customers who need to have a voice, but there'll also be organizations and including maybe municipal governments and others that will need to have a voice in this process. So that's all that we were trying to say. And the process will, in terms of involvement, not just in the long-term planning, but in the shorter and medium-term planning, the same thing applies, because what we plan for the next 5 years and the 5 years after that are going to be probably quite different. And so there needs to be input in all of those stages of planning and not just in the longer-term planning.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jacob, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I was going to just chime in and kind of hit on some of our comments that we had filed around that topic with Al, of very much agreeing, engaging stakeholders and helping them through some of these challenging transitions, have a lot of programs in place and propose a variety of programs to work with customers directly, and pointing to the straw proposal and ultimately the stakeholder engagement subgroup, definitely looking for opportunities to engage stakeholders, interested parties, customers, developers in discrete points within that process to be able to collect data, get information, get feedback to help inform the process. I think, in terms of the short and near term, we continue to focus on prior to project initiation, right? Once, especially in the short term, as projects are going, that there's really time constraints as we work towards meeting the safety and reliability of the system and getting projects in place. And that creates a lot of challenges around adding additional time to those timelines. And so really we're interested in having those discussions before project initiation occurs, and getting that feedback. And, as we've talked about before, if we are getting feedback on inputs and assumptions and ultimately what methodologies are, that should all flow throughout the entire process. And there should be kind of connections there as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. And I do recall seeing those didn't necessarily fit nicely within Al's topic, but I do recall seeing those, and those in your comments kind of go more to the overall transparency, which I know is an ongoing topic of discussion. So, and look forward to seeing hopefully an update end of the month on that one. All right, let's see. Al had another topic: stakeholders' expectations for utility plans and priorities and requests. Again, that kind of ties in with a lot of what you just touched on. Al, did you want to chime in, sir?
Yes, I rolled those two together. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, sir. All right. Let's see. The next one I had was bidirectionality. Seems like that this was that we weren't too far off on this. Let me just grab my notes here. I actually think we're making I think we're making progress. I don't know. Guess you'll see when I give you my summary here. I mean, do we need to dive into any more bidirectionality issues? Eli, you want to jump in, sir? I mean, I think it seems like
I was going to say,
yeah,
others can feel free to disagree. I don't know that we need to materially spend time discussing bidirectionality. It's a concept that we've discussed in the past. I think the key, I think the issue around having a productive discussion is that bidirectionality is really just kind of a concept, and there are all of the things that we're doing here all tie back to bidirectionality. And so I don't know that there is a specific action item or discussion or recommendation regarding bidirectionality itself, other than, the DSP process and utilities should increasingly incorporate bidirectionality into decision making. But it's it's hand wavy. It's not like a real material, concrete, specific thing.
I just want to make I just want to make sure I'm hitting everybody's issues folks wanted to hit. Let's see, dynamic hosting capacity maps. I think we've got an established positions on that. All right, let's jump ahead unless anybody wants to stay back. I was going to jump ahead to block 6, which locational value assessment. I know it seems like folks are pretty well set in their positions. Jacob, did you have any thoughts in terms of MEA was seeking reports, especially for solar, for every 5 to 10 years on a locational value assessment? Does that ring a bell?
Did they file comments this week? If so,
it was last week, I believe. Let me pull them up. Let's see. It would have been on the 9th. So let's see. Is it the 9th? No, I'm sorry. That's not it. Is it that long ago? Oh, no. So this was the beginning of January. January 5th. You want me to forward them to you?
If it's that far back, I did get those. I just wasn't sure if it was something.
Okay. Week. Yeah. No, nothing new. Nothing new on that topic. I know the utilities love reporting requirements, right?
Yeah. I can take that back to see if we have any specific comments on that. I know, just in general, in terms of locational value.
It wasn't, it was a lot of, some of the things we've already touched on, Paul and OPC were stressing that developers need information on constraints. MEA, I believe, was looking for reports every 5 to 10 years, especially for solar. Al supported assessments that are ongoing, not a one and done. It should be standardized and require a benefit cost analysis from case number 9674.
Gotcha. I think, you know, where we've kind of been with that is still trying to fully understand and kind of remain cautious of where DER capabilities on the distribution system
Right.
can be realized. And so I think that's consistent with what we had talked about before with that, and some of the challenges of realizing those values within the distribution system.
Right. Now, are the utilities just opposed generally to the concept of the locational value assessments?
I think in general, obviously, you know, there's not fully understanding and seeing or where those services can be realized by the DERs. If that's one of the primary values, especially that's, you know, I think in some of the conversations before, we intermingle with value a lot around both compensation and actual value to the grid, and kind of differentiating from the compensation piece, which is, I think, separate from distribution system planning, you know, really around what is provided to the grid in terms of that value. I think, you know, there's certainly aspects of that's incorporated in evaluations, but that's really focused then on the grid services, at least my understanding of it.
Okay. Great. Eli, do you want to jump in? Or do you just have your camera on?
Yeah, I generally tend to agree that compensation would probably be a little bit of scope creep here. But I do think that assessing and determining and clarifying what the value is for all the services that DERs can provide is critical to the system planning process, because if you know, just inherently, if you are assuming that DER can only provide one value, it may not be cost effective as compared to a traditional wire solution. But if there's an understanding that DERs can provide additional grid benefits, which they can, and those grid benefits have an explicit value associated with them, you know, assuming 3 benefits for this one DER can therefore result in, you know, that DER being more cost effective than a traditional wires solution. And so I think that is the value piece. It's value, like valuing the benefits that DER can provide, and then also valuing the locational benefit of that DER. And several other jurisdictions have developed locational benefits of DER, and I think that's something that can be reasonably readily incorporated. So agree, compensation is probably out of the scope of this work group, at least at this stage. But I nonetheless think that determining and assessing and being abundantly clear about what those values are is important and has a material impact to distribution system planning.
And I think that's where, you know, our comments kind of lead to is really around those pieces of what exactly are those additional benefits? Can they actually be realized by the DERs? And how are those benefits not already served by other equipment on the system? And so understanding that's where we kind of remain cautious around actually being able to realize those benefits, recognizing those DERs can provide, you know, theoretically could provide them. Can they actually be realized within the distribution system? That's where kind of we remain cautious.
Okay, but in terms of conducting the locational value assessment, is that like a no-go for you guys? And if it is, that's fine. I'm just trying to make sure I capture your position correctly.
Yeah, I think our position in terms of completing a locational value assessment is, you know, unsure of the value we get from it versus the resources required to complete it.
All right, very good. Thanks. Just want to make sure. Yes, sir. Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah. What happened? There you go. Okay. Yeah, no, thanks. And I'm just wondering actually, if this discussion of location of value doesn't actually roll together with the box we're going to come to, I guess it's box 8, which is how you evaluate solutions. But if you go back and look at the Berkeley Lab presentation from the technical conference, they actually did a fairly detailed piece on the benefit cost analysis for adding DERs to the system, which I think would include, I believe this, although I don't actually know all the details of the national standards technical methodology, which the group that's working on this, the unified cost benefit analysis, that the PSC group that's working on this is going to come up with a methodology for us to assess the value of different categories of DERs as they are added to the system. So it seems to me that actually will include locational value among other of the attributes that Eli is talking about. So I think once that is in place, once the commission has signed off on how that should be used, I think it's going to help us deal with some of these issues of what benefits are and what benefits aren't. And again, it is content in the rather detailed Berkeley Lab presentation, so we might want to look at that.
Okay, yeah, and well, and please, they're going to be here today, so please, I'm going to star that, and hopefully we can come back to it. And Al, you can ask that question to see what their analysis is actually going to include. All right, let's see. All right, let's see if we can get through one more. I think. All right. Next thing I had was hosting capacity upgrades. OPC was looking for a process to identify and plan upgrades. The utilities were generally in agreement, other than they opposed the proposal to have to coordinate with the gas utilities, which they've already talked about. And Jacob, do you guys have what do you guys currently have a plan for identifying areas where you're going to upgrade, or a plan where you're going to upgrade?
For which piece of this are we talking about again? I just want to make sure.
Let's see. We already, this might, if I may be repeating myself, but just based on my notes. So, all right. Why don't we strike that? I think we probably already talked about it. My apologies.
Yeah.
All right. Then we've got, and again, if this is in the way I've kind of broken this thing up just in my draft report by topic, and we can certainly combine things or get rid of things if it's going to be repetitive. Value of DER. I don't know if we kind of already hit that. OPC is saying that the utilities don't. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think, Judge, we had hit that in the
Okay. All right. All right. Well, we're crossing a lot of stuff off my list. All right. We talked about bidirectional grid. So, well, that's kind of all I had right now, at least in terms of follow-ups. We've got blocks 7 and 8 to discuss. Do you guys want to take an hour for lunch? We've got RPS work group and then benefit cost analysis work group coming up. So Jacob's nodding. He's the only one with the camera on. So please plan on being back here. Eli agrees. Please be back here at 12:30, and we'll have a couple presentations, and then we'll hopefully go through blocks 7 and 8 and finish up whenever. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ed.